Hello, welcome to the podcast. This is Bristol Real. I'm Val.
I'm Jerome.
And I'm Tom. And today we spoke to Maff from Bristol Wood Recycling Project, which is a really interesting sustainability scheme based around Temple Meads. So the project involves collecting scrap wood from businesses, which they clean up and then sell at quite a reduced rate. They also manufacture bespoke products from reused wood, and they get quite a lot of work from some of the bars and cafes around Stokes Croft.
We spoke to Matt about what the Bristol Wood Recycling Project is, how they're actually having trouble finding a new home at the moment because their lease with the council is beginning to expire. Various other projects around Bristol, including the Bristol Home Waste Recycling Project, which is also pretty cool, so listen to that. The importance of social enterprise in Bristol, as we always talk about most weeks, as well as social attitudes towards sustainability at the moment and the consequences those will have in future generations. And we talk about those in very real terms. So enjoy the episode.
The idea is that it's cheaper for everybody. It's not, they don't have to you don't have to be green to use us, if you know what I mean. It it makes economic sense as well.
So who does actually use you? What is your who generally comes to you? Is it individuals or companies? Or in
terms of customers, timber yards, anybody, it depends. Sort of handymen, artists, a lot of allotmenteers, people looking for wood for their allotments. But anybody needs. The kind of people we get is people that need sort of a piece of wood. They don't really care that much about what it is. They don't want to go to Wicks or Travis Perkins where they might have to buy a big pack of it. And so sort of small jobs like that. And then we get carpenters and sort of brickies, things like that are looking for sort of construction wood, and we'll sell that to them as well.
Okay, so it's actually, you find that it's high quality enough. Because people, I imagine, have a bit of a stigma against recycled wood, say it's not as good as the new stuff, but... Yeah,
I suppose. Well, I don't know about stigma, but the thing is, I think people think because it's recycled, it should be pennies, and so we'll sell a piece of 4x2 for $1.28 a metre. New, it might be £2.50, £3. Mm-hmm. People come in here expecting it to be 20 pence, because they think of it as the same as like picking it up from a skip outside or something like that. And so we have to sort of give a bit of spiel about the fact that we're self-financing, because that's the key to the project, is we don't take grants. We're not reliant on that at all. So, but that's how we pay for it, by charging what we see as a fair rate for the wood. Mm-hmm. So, but it's still cheaper than new. So, yeah. Mm.
How did the project start in the first place?
It started in 2004 with a man called Ben Moss and Nicola Padden also. They shadowed a project in Brighton that was the first one to set up, and a man called Rick Mehmed came up with the idea of charging collection contracts, using the wood to sell it, and being self-financing. And so they sort of shadowed what he was doing, and then decided to find a site. And this one was given by the council first of all at a peppercorn rate, because even back then in 2004 they were talking about the arena being built, and it was like, you'll only be here a year, and then the arena's going to be built. And 10 years later it is actually being built, much to our chagrin, because it means that we do have to move out now. So
do you have somewhere to move?
No, not yet. Wow. No, it's a sort of real tense time for us at the moment.
When's the sort of deadline?
Our lease runs out on June the 20th.
Okay.
But we've sort of had soundings with the various parties that we'll be able to stay here until Christmas. But no, it's a real worry at the moment, and the project could fold, so it's pretty tense.
Wow. So how's the history got to this point then? How have you developed as a project?
I think to start it was got the land. Basically, all of the buildings outside the main ones have been constructed by us. The yard's been divided by us. At the start, it was one van going out, a sort of bum bag and stacks of wood, and so you have to be sort of quite hardy to come and shop here, really. And the whole process over the next 10 years has been to sort of make it a more professional outfit and an easier place for everybody to shop, rather than just sort of pioneers, if you know what I mean. And then also alongside that, as soon as we've got any extra money, we either increase the staff wages, because at the start we're a cooperative here, and so you're running a £250,000 company, and we were paying people $16,000 a year pro rata, and we were finding it really difficult to recruit. So We've got that up to 19,000 now. It still isn't that great, really, but it's enough for sort of people that want to help us out to come and work here. And then the other part of the extra finances was to improve the volunteer experience here, because obviously with our outlook and politics, if you like, the last thing that we would want this project to be is built on the exploitation of free labour. And so we try and do as much as we can for the volunteers. For a project of this size, we've got a full-time a full part-time volunteer coordinator whose sole job is to look out for what the volunteers need to develop them and to make sure there's no problems for them. And then the other thing the final thing that we sort of put in place about 4 years ago was we started expanding the workshop that we've got. We always had a workshop that was just sand, planks and things like that, but we actually started turning that into a joinery, and so now you'll see it so many places. Almost all of the pubs in Stokes Croft and things like that, you'll see they're almost all kitted out with our scaffold boards or pallet wood. I don't know what we're going to do when chunky wood goes out of fashion. We're going to go out of business probably, but so that's just the three parts to it now. So, and through the expansion of the workshop especially, we're sort of self-financing and we make a small surplus now, whereas we didn't used to. So we're sort of, if it wasn't for the site change, we're sort of economically sound now, but with the site change it's all up in the air.
Are you planning to get somewhere larger to help expand, or is it
anywhere really? You know, it would be nice.
You don't really have a choice at the moment.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a bigger workshop. That's the area that we could expand, and we could sort of get more volunteers in there, because the third stage of the volunteer experience, if you like, is to do the denailing, to do the picking up of the wood, and then after 10 visits they get one of these, a hoodie or a t-shirt. And they're then allowed to sort of do more interesting tasks, if you know what I mean. And the big thing that people want to do is in the workshop, learn how to use a sander and sort of basic joinery skills. And then the other thing that we started doing now is sort of helping in the shop or the yard, which is good.
It sounds like every single stage of every part of the business is beneficial to someone. It's like, do you have any kind of areas of unsustainability that you try and work on? Because obviously you have to drive somewhere. Yeah,
that's the biggest one. You know, we're sending a diesel van out to pick up wood. It's not completely environmentally sound, but
do you monitor that? You try and track and minimise that? Because I imagine you're very sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, we did a couple of years ago. We sort of tried to work out the mileage of the vans, and it was shockingly bad. You know, like because we couldn't afford new vans, so we bought a van for £4,000 5 years ago. You know, it's worth 20 pence now or something like that, you know, and it was incredibly inefficient. And so we sort of looked for funding to buy a new van, because the company's run on 4 social objectives basically, to provide affordable timber, which is the timber yard, to reclaim resources from waste, which is the collections part of it, to enable social inclusion, which is the volunteers part of it, and then for the core of the business to remain self-financing, so we're not dependent on grants and we don't need money from the council to run. But anything that's not the core of the business, so like one-off purchases of workshop equipment or vans, we do look for funding for. And so it was the Santander project. They gave us £20,000 to buy a new van, and so that improved the efficiency of it. But it's still a major sort of problem. But we've got the thing that I love about working here, I come from quite a political background, you know, like an anarchist. I used to be sort of involved in an anarchist social centre as a cooperative and a bookshop and things like that. And I really like this project for its pragmatism, in the fact that it's not enough to be right, it has to work, you know, and that's our sort of motto, if you like. It's as right as possible, but it also works, you know. And so in order to meet the commitments of collections, you have to have a reliable van, because if you start missing collections you lose customers. And so a reliable van is a diesel one. We used to have one that ran on chip fat, wasn't very reliable, you know. It sort of caused problems for the engine, so we the next one we chose to run on diesel.
What was your sort of history? How did you get into doing this?
Me personally?
Yeah.
Gifted into it, basically, is I sort of knew someone that was in the project, and I was hired as a job share with someone else who knew what they were doing, and I was the sort of make weight in terms of finance administration, and then I learned on the job, put myself through 2 bookkeeping courses, and here I am, company secretary.
Where did you work beforehand?
Call centres mostly. I did sort of 10 years in call centres, which sort of blew my mind.
Do you have anything to say on that? Working in call centres 20 years and then coming here must be a very, very different experience.
Well, I did things in between. I worked as a security guard at festivals, and sort of basically the big change for me was I was doing that. I had a lot of debts that I'd sort of got from when I was younger, from pissing it up and just being depressed, as most 20-year-olds are. And so I brought in a lot of debts, and I sort of went through the call centres, got more debts at the start because I hated it, and so I was sort of self-anaesthetising, I suppose would be the best way to put it. But then eventually I sort of got into a team leader position there, which I hated, but got me more money, and I paid off my debts. And as soon as I did that, I left, because I think one of the greatest lessons that I can pass on to your listeners is that working full time is rubbish. Like your life just goes like that when you work full time. You wish for lunchtime, you wish for the end of the day, you wish for the end of the week, you wish for the bank holidays, you wish for your holidays, you wish for Christmas, you're wishing your life away, the whole thing. So for me personally and politically, going part time was a big pull, and so that's why I sort of changed my career. But I ended up here in accident, really, but I really did like the project, and I've been here 7 years and I still do. That's sort of a big thing, I think. There's no hidden secrets here, apart from the diesel van picked up so eloquently straight away. There's no sort of hidden horrors here. It does what it says it does, and it's a good place to work.
Yeah, I think so. You would much prefer, it seems, to work for a kind of social enterprise rather than a business. Do you know of like any others? Well, obviously there's loads in Bristol that are really good. Have you got any other favourites that work within Bristol?
We're part of, last year we set up a group called Bristol Reuse that was working alongside a lot of other projects, and I think they're good projects. Sofa Project, Children's Scrap Store, Emmaus, Fair Share. Yeah, I think Bristol's quite lucky in that it's got a lot of projects that were started for the right reasons and have been fairly successful in sort of keeping themselves. In my experience, the third sector is there's a lot of lemons there. Like there's a lot of social enterprises that are set up for the wrong reasons. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that maybe with the best intentions start companies and then start employing people and give them the most horrendous time, like that don't have proper terms and conditions, that don't pay them properly, that bully them. The sector's unfortunately notorious for that. And so I think the way to cure that is cooperatives. I've very rarely met a bad cooperative because it's quite hard to do, like unless everybody in the organisation is sour, then, it's quite difficult to get away with it. And so, yeah, I'm always a little bit suspicious of projects where someone's getting paid £80,000 a year and everybody else is on minimum wage. So the social seems to be external, whereas internally it's antisocial.
Yeah. In terms of a sustainable future, do you think projects like this are the best way of attaining it? Like, I don't want to go too much into politics, but like engaging in renewable energy industries or anything, that sort of thing, that gets very political, and it probably isn't it doesn't make as quick a change as this does, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you've got to do both. Basically, you've got to make institutions. That there's a sort of concept called dual power that's one way of sort of creating a revolution, if you like, and it's sort of and that's you create your own institutions that become so successful that the old corrupt ones fall away, basically, and we don't what's the best word? We don't sort of deliberately, with that in the front of our mind, run this place in that way, but it is a sort of side effect that we are creating a business model that shows that you don't need funding to do good things, and you can do it in a way where hopefully no one gets ripped off, and that's inspiring. But at the same time, we rely on the infrastructure of this country. We rely on the sort of the beneficial atmosphere for third sector enterprises in Bristol. There's a lot of bigger sort of macro things that would need to change for businesses like this to become the norm, and so I don't think you can forget that.
Yeah. Bringing back to the actual what you do here, what are the kind of variety of projects you have? So, has there been a recent something particularly large?
What, in terms of what we made, or
yeah, like a kind of a long-term project you had, or is it all just kind of short-term?
Yeah, it's all sort of orders basically that we. There's only the one project, and that's the sort of cyclical thing that we do with the wood. But then as part of that, we try and sort of expand parts of the business. Like we used to sort of divide up our wood into wood that can't be recycled, as in painted wood or wood that's been treated, and that used to go. I don't know what used to happen to it really, but it wasn't that pleasant. Whereas now that goes to biomass generators. The clean wood would be going for recycling into chipboard or other sort of last stop things where you're creating something that basically then has to go to landfill. IKEA furniture is a classic example. It's all recycled, or it's using sustainable things, but then a piece of IKEA furniture can't then have another use. It has to be landfilled. Right. And so we try to sort of reclaim as much as we can, because that's what we believe in, reuse rather than recycling. And one of the big project that we're doing at the moment is trying to get that definition enshrined in both the public's mind but also the council's mind, with the ultimate aim of looking for the council to set a reuse target in the same way that it sets a recycling target. And part of Bristol Reuse, we've just got some money from the Bristol Green Capital to hire a member of staff to sort of work full-time on the project. And that's one of the things they'll be looking to do, work with the council to create a situation where we're diverting more reclaimable stuff out of the main waste stream for the city. But that's a huge task, and it's sort of in its infancy at the moment.
Mm-hmm. How have the council been cooperative so far?
Very, like with us, we've got very good relationships with the council. When we started, they were very good to us. They gave us this site on a peppercorn rent, and then later on at a below market rent. It's difficult for them now, though. So 10 years later, we've sort of, can we have the same type of deal again, please? Can you find another site for us? And the situation's changed drastically. They're selling properties now, rather than being able to in a position to help out social projects like ourselves. And again, that's external things. The state has set them a target of cutting their budgets by X million, and so they can't be as supportive to social enterprises as they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think this project's a really good example of a closed loop project. I don't know if you guys use this term, but there's one thing I heard of called the cardboard to caviar project that's absolutely brilliant, where this guy takes cardboard waste from restaurants, that goes to some application in farming, takes waste from that, goes to something else, and he gets paid at every stage.
Yeah.
I think you're kind of very similar to this.
Yeah.
Do you plan to add stages as far as possible so that every output is an input for something else?
We've looked into it. At the moment, no. At the moment, no, because we're in flux. We don't know what's going to happen. But in the past few years, when the project's been a bit more stable, we've looked at having a biomass boiler here where we could sort of burn the waste ourselves. Look at turning our waste into fuel logs, so sort of compressed sawdust logs. So it's difficult because anything would require a sort of capital investment.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to go for a capital investment, we wouldn't probably be able to fundraise it. We'd have to go into a loan agreement with someone, and we haven't really got the surplus that would allow us to sort of expand in that way. We're part of a an umbrella group called the National Community of Wood Recycling Projects that was started by the person in Brighton I mentioned, Rick Mehmed. And they sort of give us a lot of support in that, in looking at other projects. They're looking at the possibility of biomass boilers at the moment, and then they would have some kind of capital arrangement where they would loan the equipment, like a loan to buy on the equipment for us. So but it's difficult because there are flaws in everything. I mean, the thing that you mentioned, you know, like we get our firewood from Eastern Europe at the moment, kiln dried, and people are like, oh my God, why are you doing that? You know, it's sort of, but so we looked into whether we would be able to gather sort of logs from the surrounding forests and things like that. But the distribution network that would be involved would make it completely even more unsustainable than either floating it or driving it from Latvia, where the forests are managed in a way that they're actually expanding. You know, it's sort of, and so again, pragmatism is sort of, there's a lot of things that don't seem right, but then when you look at the alternative, it's actually, there's been a lot of assumptions made, or a lot of like sort of externalities, if you like, that have not been counted. So
in this network of recycling projects, how many actually are there? How many cities are involved?
Well, I think the idea is that they'll what they're aiming for is national coverage. So then they could help offer national agreements to big house builders, for example, and then any site that they had, they would be able to get the wood picked up. And I think they're about halfway there. You know, there's around us are the ones that I know. There's projects in Taunton, in Weston, Newport. One I've forgotten. They're going to be furious at me. Chippenham in Wiltshire. And so it's sort of, it's getting there, because it's definitely an idea that works and it has been shown to work. It tends to only work in more urbanised areas because of the distance that you need to go to pick up wood waste. So a lot of the projects are sort of more modelled on their circumstances. Some don't do as much collections as us. Some have a bigger workshop than us. You know, it's sort of it tends to vary a bit.
How does the collection work? Do you get sort of called from somebody and say, we have so much wood to...
Yeah.
And is it mainly kind of businesses or individuals
who... The biggest clients are construction companies, either house construction or office construction. So all the big names, Wimpy's, Leadbitters, Waits. And then also we collect from smaller industrial factories that may... A lot of pallets, for example. We've got places that import machinery from all around the world, and they're left with a big stack of pallets in their yard, and so they'll pay us to get rid of them. And from that, we can use the pallet wood to either make furniture or sell in the shop as timber. And then another thing that we're doing recently is we've got a national agreement through the NCWRP, the national community, to collect waste from B&Q outlets. And again, you know, on the surface you think, why would B&Q help us in any way? You know, like we're a competitor to them, but we're not, because the customer that comes here is different to the customer that B&Q would get. And so they recognise that, and so in order to whatever the reason, you know, if you were cynical, you would see it as a sort of a way that they were looking to achieve their social responsibility targets. But I'm sort of, again, more pragmatic than that. I think they're doing it because they want to, but also because it solves a problem for them. You know, it's sort of, they're getting their waste picked up cheaper than they would normally, from a company that they know, that they can call up and be flexible with. And so, it's sort of, it fits the model for people to do that, I think.
Do you have any unusual clients?
Not so much for collections. The workshop tends to get a few unusual requests. We sort of had to make a coffin, which is a bit... I think we've got pictures somewhere. They were going to use it for a storage cupboard, but they wanted it in the shape of a coffin. So, a set of stocks. You know, we do work for festivals, and that can be some strange old things. But then we get loads of strange old things back. It's tends to be quite varied, but with the collections, it's a lot more. Yeah, that's the sort of business end of the operation, if you like. But yeah, we still do collections from private individuals and things like that, and churches. We get, like, over the years, we've got a lot of church pews and things like that that you'll see dotted around people's gardens and things like that. So yeah, it's always interesting to see what people do with the stuff that we have, because often it's something that maybe can't be used for its original purpose. A fire door is a classic example. A fire door, once a fire door is removed from the property, it can't be replaced, it can't be put into another place, it has to be recertified, and so it's just a big chunk of sort of wood filled with sawdust and glues, and you can't really use it for that much, but people still buy them, and they'll put them in an allotment to make it a divider for their composting or something like that. And so yeah, it's always nice to sort of be walking around Bristol and go, oh my god, there's something of ours there. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. And we have a sort of customer corner where we ask customers to mail us pictures of what they've made from the thing, and then we try and put those up. Yeah. So it's good.
Have you done anything with the wood?
I'm terrible. I'm notoriously bad at sort of anything practical. So no, I just sit in the office and count the money.
Do the numbers.
Yeah.
The people who work here, do they have? I'm sure they have a lot of varied backgrounds. Any of them have a history in actually making things, engineers or
carpenters?
Yeah. There's two people that work in the workshop, and a sort of prerequisite for them would be some kind of carpentry experience. Okay. We've had a lot of furniture makers that sort of come here. It's always very interesting to see what staff do apply, because a carpenter can earn a lot more than £19,000 a year pro rata, and so we either get people that are on the first rungs of the ladder, or we get people that have been doing it for a long time and maybe don't need the money as much as they used to and would rather do something good with their lives, or various reasons. And so the people in the workshop are skilled. Usually the people that are in the wood shop, from experience, know something about carpentry or are carpenters themselves. And then the drivers are sort of a bit more like me. They drive rather than use their hands. But it's a good mixture of sort of skills, basically.
And the hours, are they sort of typical working hours? 9 to 5?
8:45 to 5:15. Yeah. We used to have a maximum of 4 days per week for any member of staff. About half of us work 3 days and the other half work 4 days. But we recently decided we would go up to 5 days if we needed to be flexible, but we'd rather not, for that sort of work-life balance, really.
Would you say the scope for massive massive kind of expansion projects like this, like, one, should that happen, and two, like, could you recycle other things like plastics? Is that as feasible? Obviously, wood's probably easier.
It's, first of all, would it be desirable? We don't have a mission to expand. We don't have a requirement from our shareholders to produce surplus or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so the way that we run the company is with the social objectives. And so we've been offered sort of improvements in the past, and we've sort of weighed them up very carefully to think about, will this increase the amount of wood that's being reclaimed? How would the volunteers fit into this? Is there a role for them? Would it provide a better experience for them? Could we afford it? It's sort of there's a lot of factors that have to come into play for that, and so it's sometimes desirable, but not always. If it's just desirable for money, then sometimes that is desirable to make the project run, but not always. And then could we do it? Not us, but in cooperation with other projects, we could. Plastics is a bit of a bad example because it's so sort of difficult to recycle on a sort of a semi-professional scale, which is what I'd call us. It's sort of, you have to have quite a lot of capital investment into machinery to make that work. But that's one of the things that Bristol Reuse is looking at, is what's called a household waste recycling centre, HWRC, Bristol doesn't really have one at the moment that works in the way that we're envisioning. But that would be the biffer lorries as they are now, the main recycling ones, coming along, or in conjunction with the tips. So the Days Road tip, that's up the road where residential people go and you drop off your old furniture or your computers or things like that. Having some kind of diversion from that main waste stream into recycling stuff, that's sort of the big idea at the moment. And Bristol's got a chance of being sort of a world leader on that if we can get our act together. But again, requires big funding, requires the big companies that handle the waste. I mean, you're talking millions of tons of rubbish a year, so that has to be a very professionalised company with a lot of resources that can do that. And then they have to be amenable into the hassle, which is what it's going to be. At the moment, you're talking about a closed system. They've got it beautifully worked out where everything goes, and it's all fine. And then we're saying, right, well, can we pick in there and take something out? And they're like, no, you can't. And then that's going to be a massive hassle for us. But there'll be people in that company that are more not enlightened, but sort of more amenable to that idea. They'll say, oh, well, there might be a way. And then the council will sort of say, well, if there is a way and you can do this, this, this and this, then we might be able to make this happen. And that's the sort of stage that we're coming up to. But yeah, it's a problem in these difficult times, getting anyone to spend any money, and all of these things cost money, so it's difficult.
So the bigger companies that do all the collections, you suggest they're actually quite good at it? They are quite, because you imagine the big companies, they're going to be throwing stuff away all the time. I've seen a documentary where they literally just throw away half the recycling.
They're good in delivering what they're asked to do.
Yeah,
so they're asked to clean the streets of rubbish, either through bins or through street cleaning and things like that. And they're like, 15, 20, 10 years ago, whatever, they were like, right, well, we don't want you just to chuck it all in landfill anymore. And they're like, okay, we don't want to do that, we don't want to do that, we don't want to... You have to do that. Okay, we're going to do that. And they, and they do it, what they're asked to do. So now you're saying, right, you have to recycle food waste and cardboard and plastics from the curbside deliveries. So they, we'll do that, but again, their sort of solutions for it tend to be large scale as well. So it's like, okay, we'll get all of that, chuck it in a biomass reactor and burn it to produce energy. Great, that's better than what was happening before. But that was a big company talking to a big company talking to a big company saying, we're going to sort this out, and so can you handle 50 million tons of waste a year? Yes. Okay, right, we're going to do this. Whereas what I would like to see more is much, much more difficult, which is, can you create a network of, 50,000 small enterprises that can handle 10,000 tons each? It's sort of, that's a much bigger ask, and it requires a lot more sort of state involvement, really, to make it happen.
You think it's feasible to get close to 100% recycling?
I think
in this country?
It will happen. I think in 20 years' time we'll be digging up landfill to get resources out of it. It is sort of, as the price of oil goes up, the price of plastics goes up. If plastics become unaffordable, I don't know whether I'm allowed to swear on your programme, but it's, the shit hits the fan massively. And that's when you're already finding, like, sort of entrepreneurs are stockpiling old washing machines, things like that, in these huge underground caverns, because they know at some point they'll be going back and picking that through. Mobile phones are the sort of thing that's coming out now, all of the heavy metals that are incredibly expensive in there. When the phones were produced, it didn't really matter. Now that those have gone exponentially up in value, and China has cornered the market in the production of it and the sale of it, people are going back and taking them apart. And so, I don't believe that recycling is going to be a problem in the future, because the economic situation will create a market for it. Whether that will be sort of done in the right way, and whether it will have an overall beneficial impact for the environment, is the challenge that we all face as people that want to see sort of the planet healed.
Is someone working on trying to help set up that system? around, or is that
Yeah,
nobody really working on that?
no, it's sort of what we're looking for, what we're working for here. Again, it's sort of pragmatism and gradualism, really.
Yeah.
You know, it's sort of, if we could create in Bristol a household waste recycling centre in conjunction with whoever held the main Bristol contract and made it work, then that's the kind of thing that you can show to other organisations. And then that's the sort of the push on it, if you like. The pull on it is state regulation. If states started sort of saying, okay, right, we'll set a target where you have to reuse 30%, or you have to reclaim rather than recycle a certain percentage of plastics, make it happen. And like I said, big companies are very good at doing what you tell them to. And if you went told that the industry, the waste industry, you need to do this, they'll bitch and moan, but they'll do it. You know, it's sort of, they'll find a way to do it, because of course otherwise they go out of business, and that's their responsibility to their shareholders, is to make money and stay in business, so they'll do it.
Has the legislation been changing much over the past few years, or has it just been kind of steady?
No, it's. I think the first job that we've got is to create a division in the public and also corporate and state sort of edifices, that there's a difference between reuse and recycle, because at the moment it's all seen as the same thing.
Yeah.
When we started, we were sort of advertising our improvement over skips, in that we would recycle. Now you look at most skip adverts, they'll say 100% recycled, because what they do is they'll send it for these big solutions kind of thing. Reuse is something that's not really suited for a big model, because you do have to hand sort most things to separate what can be reused, what can be recycled. That's why we haven't got any corporate competitors, because there's no way to make it work without using volunteers. To do that part of it would be too labour intensive and too costly. And so, because they can't really use volunteers, well, I'm sure the government workfare scheme will sort that eventually, but for the moment that they can't. And so we don't have any competitors in our field, because reuse isn't suited for that big model. But obviously that's a massive problem for the reuse community, if you like, is that recycling could offer this win-win to big industry, where you can actually provide this solution in a way that fits with your business model, whereas reuse is a lot more difficult, I think. So there's going to be a lot more work to be done on that.
Why is it that you choose to be Bristol Wood Recycling Project rather than Bristol Wood Reuse Project, if you feel that you do reuse it rather than recycle it?
I think when the project was started 10 years ago, even in our minds, there wasn't that much of a division between reuse and recycle, because recycle back then was a sort of almost a catch-all term of like doing things rather than chucking it in the bin.
Yeah.
Whereas now, out of the solutions that have been offered by big industry, if you like, in our minds at least, it started to create this division between, well, you can recycle something and turn it into something that then has to be landfilled, or you can reuse something for its original purpose, where you don't have to put any kind of output energy into it. You can just reclaim it, tidy it up and put it in. Because obviously, yeah, it's great to advertise plastic pens. This used to be a such and such. That used to be such and such before you put lots of heat onto it to melt it and put it through this incredibly energy sort of consuming process. So, but again, history's on our side in terms of the future, if that's a bit of a twisted metaphor. Future's on our side. In that, the price of oil is only going to go one way, I believe. You know, the price of energy is only going to go one way. And so reclaiming something without putting energy into it is going to become a lot more viable. And so our sort of aim is to have a solution for that could be sort of transferable, ready, rather than someone else coming up with a solution that might not actually do everything that we'd like it to.
Yeah. It's quite a nice way of thinking about it, actually. It's kind of you get a lot of grim things about the environment, like grim predictions, but you're saying it's kind of inevitable that we're going to be able to solve the problem because we have to.
Yeah.
And it's going to be soon.
it's not that
You're
positive.
saying, yeah.
But I mean, because
Well, I
it's sort of,
suppose, but
it's
we tend to find a way when we have to.
yeah, exactly right. You know, like necessity is the mother of invention, and that's sort of very relevant. And I think, but also legislation is the mother of invention in a way as well. You know, it's and so you have to create that sort of environment where the environment is prioritised. And despite all of the talk at the moment, we're nowhere near that. You know, like big companies are still allowed to externalise all of their problems, which allows them to make super profits that go to the same people that create a massively divided society. And so until we start to sort of solve some of those bigger problems, then it seems a bit grim, really, the outlook.
I think we'll be able to spend quite a lot of time on our last two questions, so we might as well ask them.
I think
Should ask
so,
them now?
These are really good ones, especially for the project.
Cool.
We have
Go
two
for it.
questions that we ask every single guest on the show, and the first one is more optimistic. What are you looking forward to in the next 20 years? What are you excited for?
Retirement. No. Well, yeah, change. You know, like I am an eternal optimist. I believe that people are inherently good, and I believe that it's the situation that we're in that is making people do bad things. I believe that situation will change, whether there's going to be a lot of resistance to it, but I think it will. And so, yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future. The only problem is there is now this ticking clock of how much damage we're doing to the environment that we live in that is irreversible. But apart from that, I'm sort of... Capitalism has had its day, consumerism has had its day, you know, it's sort of it's a very positive time to be living in, I think.
Mm-hmm. Then we have another question, which isn't so optimistic. This is, what are you not looking forward to? What are you worried about for the next 20 years?
I think we're going to have a lot of problems before we get to where we're going. There's a lot of vested interests that are going to be incredibly hard to remove. Mm-hmm. And we're living in a system that is inherently flexible and can sort of commodify and accommodate various radical streams of thinking quite easily and turn them into something that's actually a negative. You know, like if you look at the revolutions of the 60s and how liberalism now has become almost a form of conservatism, in that people believe that their own struggles were won. And now, you know, the societies they don't empathise enough with the other aspects. The migrants that have, 700 people just died yesterday, and the reaction to it was appalling. You know, it's sort of so there's a lot of short-termism out there and a lot of individualism that we have to not get rid of, because nobody wants to go back to, whatever, the Pembury fishing community where, I always look at Lars von Trier's Breaking Bad. I don't know, not Breaking Bad, what's it called? Breaking the Waves. But anyway, watch that if you want to have a look at what we don't really want to go back to. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of problems, shortage of resources, nationalism, all of these things, competitors, are going to be big problems in the future. And at the same time, there's this ticking clock that I certainly believe in, that we could do irreparable damage to our environment that wouldn't be able to be repaired, in human sort of lifetimes. And that's incredibly worrying. But I still fly. I still sort of do all of these things because I believe that the solutions have to be a lot bigger than that. And so you sort of, it's fine. The example I always use is I remember someone on the news sort of boasting, a man of course, boasting that he had got down to one bag of rubbish a year, and it's like, what are you thinking? Like, A, you've turned it into a total sort of man project that you're going to be the best at this. B, so what? Like, I'm sure your kids, when they eat Caramacs or whatever, just chuck them in the road rather than bringing them home because they know you're going to get such a bollocking, And it was just that's what I mean about, you can get these ideas and then they're implemented in a way that actually creates more problems because it doesn't recognise the wider conditions that's been implemented in. And so there's a lot of work to do, I think.
It's quite urgent to talk about it. But in the recent political debates, they haven't been talking about climate change at all, or how what policy they're going to introduce. It's a shame.
Well, it's all our fault. Don't blame the politicians. It's our fault. It's politicians are meaningless. They're all ephemeral. They just do what they're told. At the moment, we've created a society where the people that tell them what to do are big businesses and vested interests. That's not their fault. It's our fault for taking our eyes off the watch. And so we've got to get all of that back. But once we do it, it'll all change in a day. Basically, it's I've got no problems at all with it.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening.